Olá pessoal, muito boa tarde. Só esperando aí mais um minuto para podermos começar a nossa sessão de hoje. Hello everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, good night. We are just waiting a little bit more to start our session today. As soon as we have 1 p.m., we'll be starting. So, hello everyone. I'm very glad to be here with you today, to be invited by Live Inside Track Brazil. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And today we're talking a little bit about managing multicultural and overseas implementation team. We'll be with you with this quick session. But before we start, I'd like to invite everyone that is watching this video, be it today or whenever you are watching this video, to donate to the NGO Desejando Bem. Desejando Bem is an NGO that help and support families in poverty in Brazil. And the SAP community throughout Live Inside Track is doing this great initiative that is supporting this NGO. So I kindly ask you, you'll see that this QR code will be throughout the presentation on your left side. So please scan it and you'll be directed to PicPay so you could donate to this NGO. And I guess I'll be following 8 that in the previous week launched a challenge which he donated the amount of people lively following up, so I'll do the same. By the end of the session, I'll be donating to this NGO the same amount that of people lively that we'll have here today. And before I start, I will introduce myself and just going quickly over the agenda. Well, a quick introduction on who am I, our objectives of the session, why are we talking about multicultural and diverse teams, what is the scope, so what is an implementation project, the scope, its direction, and the challenges we face when receiving a group to create a team. And the biggest focus of this presentation today will be communication in high context and low context cultures. We will understand what is high context and low context cultures, where does it came from, what's the impact on the daily communications that we may face. We'll also have some examples, some remarks, final remarks, and I will leave you today with some additional materials, some additional reading materials and some books that will support your further development on this topic. So a little bit about myself. Here and in the end of the presentation, you'll find a QR code to my LinkedIn. I'll be very glad to connect to everyone and discuss a little bit. I like to talk about cultures, as we will see. I have over 18, almost 20 years experience in several industries, mostly in metal and mining, plus health and safety industry and service consulting and information technology. I have already more than 10 years experience as demand manager, service and project manager as well. And I was fortunate enough to have run projects and led projects in several continents and countries, most namely North and South America, Europe and Asia. I was glad to be in touch and have people in my team that came from over 20 nationalities. So I am very passionate about cultures, to learn their histories, to understand a little bit more of their daily activities, and a little bit more about each culture. Currently, I am SAP Demand Manager at Upper Run South America. I'm also under the Upper Run Center of Excellence for SAP, but with a temporary assignment to lean initiatives in Project Evoluir. I'm a passionate reader and learner, and as I mentioned, I love cultures, and that's why I'm here today talking with you. So, objectives of our presentation today is to raise awareness of the cultural background of multinational teams. So we are dealing in a world even more and more connected, more and more globalized. So time in, time on, time off, we are in a multicultural team dealing with people from several backgrounds. So understand the communication challenges that arise in this kind of environment, and also to propose for you additional readings that will support further development on these aspects. I'll just check the chat here. Hello, Manuel. Hello, Adi. Good afternoon. I'm very glad that you're here today. Please feel free to send your questions. We will have a Q&A by the end of this presentation. Okay. I'm very glad that you are here today watching this video. Anyone, the chat is open on the YouTube channel. You can send your questions, your remarks. I'll try to read them, each one of them, by the end of the presentation. Thanks very much for everyone that is watching. So, when we are talking about multicultural teams in projects, so what is an SAP implementation project? Just for context, I don't know. I know that some of you are not knowledgeable of SAP or are new to SAP. So in this picture here, we have the SAP Activate methodology, which I was fortunate to be involved in constructing it, and I also invite you to join the SAP Jam community, who helped building this version of the methodology, which is an evolution of SAP. And when we are talking about communication and team engagement and communication overall in a project, we'll mostly be talking about those work streams, which is customer team enablement, testing, system data migration, and solution adoption. Of course, communications are involved in all over the project phase, but I would like to highlight those ones as the most impacted by a bad or by miscommunications. And you'll see here that I've highlighted in this red box what are the phases. When we are talking about a project implementation, it could be either a new implementation of an SAP solution, be it the full ERP, just additional ERP modules like transportation or SuccessFactors. It could also be a migration to S/4HANA. We know that a lot of projects will be facing it. So most of the things that we'll be discussing here today, they are focused mostly on projects which are bigger than 2 to 3 months, and could be up to 2 years or several years rollout projects, okay? So when we start a project, first thing, there are the team members, but actually, are they actual team members in the beginning? Initially, they are just a bunch of people that the project manager and the leadership of the project receive, or the resources that are allocated. And even more and more, initially, or most of the times, they are not part of the same business areas. So even if it's a project conducted solely by a single company, usually there are many people involved for several areas, and the most common are consulting and customer relationship. And we have people from several backgrounds, several countries. As I mentioned to you, I've worked with people from more than 20 nationalities already. In a single project, we could go from 10 and up. And when we are with this challenge, from creating a team, when we receive a group, I will be proposing for you just to as a way of seeing the fourth stage that later Bruce Tuckman, he designed this and named this fourth stage of group development. Later on, he added a fifth stage, which is forming when the team just is created or the group of people is assigned to an initiative. Here we start seeing relationships being built up, and then we have storming. Storming is usually the worst in terms of deliverable, of synchronicity of the team. So there are a lot of conflicts in storming. The team is trying to see where do I fit, where do I belong here. Hello Roberta, hello Marcel. And from storming you go to norming. This is where most groups, I say, end up, or it's where the delivery is actually starting forming up. And we have performing, where we want to achieve. And finally, as this is a project, we have a common, it's a defined start and then beginning and finishing of the project. And so the latest thing we do is a journey. So everybody that was that came together to form a group will be later on assigned back to their initial environment. So, the focus of this presentation won't be actually the creating of the team, but the communication challenge that we have when we have multinational culture. And more, especially we are now, today is May 19th, 2020, so we are in the middle of the coronavirus crisis. But even before the coronavirus crisis, we already have several projects, especially international projects. The team is usually spread, back in the day we used to have an international project which we assemble everybody from several countries in a single place for several months to deliver a project. Okay, those days, and there could still have some kind of projects like this. But what we see more and more is we still have international projects. However, the team is still spread. We have part of the consulting firm in India. We'll have part of the team in the US. We'll have another one, which is the end user could be in China or in Europe, and part of the consultants will be in Brazil. So we have the team spread all over. With coronavirus, we still have additional impact in this, which is social and physical distancing. So even from the ones that are in the same country or either in the same region, like Brazil is just like India and China. It's a huge country, continental country. So we are still not in the same building. We don't have a war room. So what do we do? What shall we do in a situation like this, which is mostly common in our daily life nowadays? So first thing, you should know your team. We should know the team. We should understand their skills, their expertise and background. We should understand the cultural factors, and this is where we are going to be a little bit deeper today. And after you know your team better, we should make clear of the goals. Why are we doing this? Why did we assemble everybody to execute this project? And usually there are several goals. We can have the goals from the customer point of view, which is what are the benefits that will be delivered by this project. As a project leader, we have to make sure that those benefits are achievable by the end of it, by its delivery. And as if we are in a relationship from a consultancy and customer, we also have the project goals from the consultancy point of view will be either financially or commercial benefits. So the goals must be clear for each and everybody that belongs to the team. And I bring to you here a great presentation that André Fernandes did last week in Sidetrack Brazil as well. I hugely recommend you to watch this. he entered bigger details from team formation to shared goal, and his presentation was titled Leadership in Crisis Times. So please go on, and you'll have better details on how to establish and create a very good team in crisis times, how to share goals, okay? But going deeper in cultural factors, I'm proposed to you here today an approach. Of course, there could be several approaches, but in terms of communication, I would like to put the attention to high and low context cultures. These were firstly set by Edward Hall back in the 70s, and it mostly are focused on how explicit the messages are when they are exchanged between people, okay? So going deeper, we have cultures of high context and cultures of low context, but this is not you are either a high or low context culture. There is a scale, we'll be going deeper into it today, but in high context cultures, what usually happens is that the communication, the rules and aspects are primarily transmitted through the use of contextualism. It's not just the message itself, but how the message is passed. Who is telling the message, how he's telling, what is the context, the environment, what is the previous experience the people had together, the shared context, the body language of the one who is presenting, the personal status, how high it is in the hierarchy, the tone of the voice, so on and so forth. So I brought two examples here and we'll be detailing it later on. But the Japan culture is the highest high context culture we have in terms of communication, and they even have a term or almost a business lecture, let's say, for this high context message and communication, which is kuki or yomi, which readily translates like read the air. What does it mean? For people with business of war in the Japanese culture, they must know how to read the air, how to understand what is between the lines, how to understand the context of how the communication is being done, so that they can grab a grasp on additional messages that are not just the ones that are being orally transmitted. So this is a little bit of high context culture. We'll be coming on with additional comments later on. Just hello, Antonio, as well. Glad to see you here. And in terms of low context culture, is quite the other way around. So the message are clearly transmitted, or let's say they are primarily transmitted through language, and the rules are explicitly set. Well, what does it mean? The messages are simple, clear, straight to the point, usually, with all background needed to understand those messages being put on the table. So, quite on the opposite scale of low context culture, of high context cultures, we have the US. US is the lowest low context culture we have nowadays. Of course, cultures evolve throughout time, but US nowadays is considered to be the lowest low context culture. And they also have a say for this way of communication is say what you mean what you say. As the same way that people in Japan, once they start experience how to communicate one another and how to read the subtitles, how to read what is between the lines, the same way people in the US also learn how to be very straight to the point, how to don't let anything be hide when you need to convey a message. So and this starts, very early. Once you start learning a little bit more about communications, you see that babies, up to 1 year, they 1 year of age, they listen very well to each and every kind of sounds. Every language, or almost every language, are capable of doing. So up to 1 year, they are able to identify very well any change in those sounds, even the ones that they are familiar with, and also the ones that they are not familiar with of another language. So, for instance, if you get a kid in Brazil or a baby in Brazil and start playing Portuguese in background, he will understand. If you change the language, he will also see. It's not understand the context, but he will see the nuance. But from 1 year on, babies already start filtering mostly what they are used to in their culture. So there are several research in this. It's fascinating field, which shows that from 1 year and above, the culture already starts playing its role. So they are more prone to hear just the nuances of the sounds that they are used to in their native language. And if you play other languages in the background, they start missing those chains of the sounds, of the phonemes. It's fascinating. So that's why when dealing with multicultural teams and multinational teams, you have to be aware of those characteristics. And that's why I decided to share those knowledge and those contexts with you. Hello, Jean, as well. Thanks for coming. So I mentioned to you that there is a scale. Almost all of this material was based on several sources, but the biggest source is the Guttural map by Herick Morais. She did a great work in compiling and publishing a revised study on it and a book called the Guttural map. She published this in 2016. There were several evolutions since Edward Hall presented the term. And you can see here that we have in our left, we have the low context cultures. And as we go, as we move through the scale, we start having the high context cultures, which are the most explicit cultures, the least explicit cultures in terms of content. When we say low context, we must know that usually on low context cultures, the messages are very explicit. They are explicitly set, communicated, and it's usually context independent. You don't usually need to know how the message was transmitted. If you know the full transcript, it's enough. On the quite opposite, as high as the context are, the biggest and the least explicit the message will be. And usually you need a lot of shared context to fully understand those messages. You can see here that we have several countries spread in this scale. We have the US, Australia, Canada, Netherlands, Germany, the Anglo-Saxon countries. And in the middle of the scale, mostly going to a little bit more to the right, we have the Latin countries with Spain, Italy, France, Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina. We have Russia rightly over there between Europe and Asia, Eurasia. And at the far right of the scale, we have the Asian countries. And usually you see here those three clusters almost very well defined. Of course, within a cluster, we'll have the countries with in a position far to the left or to the right of one another, but we can clearly say that as cultural communications evolved, also as the history and the cultures evolve, also it played a role in how each culture will communicate. And it's interesting to see and note, I'll be talking as well a little bit later on this, it's interesting to note that usually, and most important, it's good to know where a specific culture fits in the scale, but most important is how does it compares to another one. For instance, we have Brazil here, almost in the middle of the scale. But we can either say that Brazil is a high context culture or a low context culture in comparison to another. So, usually when in the projects that I participated, that there were North Americans or usually people coming from Anglo-Saxon, there is usually it's not a complaint, but people of the team, Brazilian ones, usually say that, well, this guy or that girl from the project, she's very straight to the point, she's not polite. He was very good in communicating her insatisfaction or his knowledgeable of how the work was going. So in comparison with the US, Brazil is somewhat high context, and usually in our daily activities we are much more subtle in terms of communication. But when we compare Brazilian culture to the Chinese one or to the Japanese one, there is much more high context or subtle communications. Hierarchy comes into play. A lot of things come into play when there are those communications coming from this country. Some additional remarks here. We can clearly see that culture plays a role. The French has I speak for this kind of communication, sans entendu. The Spanish also, all the Spanish-speaking countries with its subentendido, and Brazilian as well. We have the subentendido. So we can clearly say and see that it's a common trait linked through the development of how the history of those countries was developed. And also, usually we can see here and start question, well, why the US, being an Anglo-Saxon country, is to the far left and not UK? Usually, what the studies show is this is also linked to the history of the country and how heterogeneous the country is. So US is a country made up of a lot of immigrants, 500 years history and with shared context. So is a newer country as well, Brazil and countries from the New World. And on the other hand, we have UK with over 3,000 documented history, as well as Italy. And when we came to the far right here, we have India, we have China, with over 5,000 to 8,000 written history documented. So we see that the shared context also plays a huge role in how the culture is communicated. So this is one of the most important slides of today, is how do we communicate in such an environment? We have largely different ways of communicating from teams all over the place, and how does this don't fall apart? How does first teams are able to understand each other and communicate well with each other and go and reach and deliver a successful project? It's important to know when we are talking about distinct cultures, high and low context. When you ask, well, what do you feel is the worst way in communication? Is a low context with a low context? Where do you think there are a lot of miscommunication? Is it a low context with a low context culture? Is it a low context with a high context culture? Or is it a high context with a high context culture? Usually people tend to say, well, things tends to go wrong when it is a low context communication with a high context. However, remember that I mentioned the shared context here. Shared context means a lot on high context communication. So, for instance, when it is a French and Brazilian teams communicating to one another, although they are Latin cultures, although they are very close in the scale in terms of high and low context, the context and the shared context of French, of France, is not the same in Brazil. Oh, it's very common that people miss this kind of issue and think that as long as French and Brazilian they are all both high context culture, they will tend to communicate well together. But guys, it's not like this, and I raise your attention to this, because when as the shared context play a huge role, you may not miss this. Okay, so we have not now, and we'll still have a lot of this from here on. Teams that are geographically sparse, they are multicultural, they are working at home. We do not have war room anymore. We are not in the same building. We're most of the times not in the same country. And how do we act in those kind of environments? And that's why I raise the focus to communication. We will see that there are a lot of other aspects that plays a big role in leading successful teams, multicultural successful teams, but communications are the vital one. The French has a say that's the same in Portuguese, and we also have this in Spanish, is loin des yeux, loin du cœur, which means far from the eyes, far from the heart, translating, but meaning the ones that are not seen are not perceived, or they are not closely related. So this is a huge effort that the project leads and project managers have to work on, which is to transpose this barrier and establishing a good communication channel with the team, and establishing good communication channel between the teams as well. So communication is vital for building trust and joint risk management, especially in consulting and customer relationship. This is especially needed. I let you additional reference here for the study that went a little bit deeper on this. And we also have to remember the nonverbal communication. We are far from each other, especially even farther now that we have the social distance. So open camera meetings are very important. It is important for me to see you. It's important for you to see me. We can, with open cameras, we start seeing the ones that are not feeling very well today, much more than they say. And we start seeing the ones that need some additional contact. And of course, we'll be able to see the nonverbal communication, how the team will share a message with us, how they will receive the message we would like to share with us. So when working with geographically dispersed teams, be it due to the coronavirus, be it to the new normal that people are talking more and more these times, we need to establish successful communication, and specifically on multicultural teams, it's very important. So, Herick, you mentioned that there is an issue when low context communicates with a high context, or the other way around. There is an issue on high context with high context, and there may be no issue between low context and low context. So what is the best approach? And that's what the message I would like to give you today. That's why it's capitalized here. One project manager must work with low context communication. It have to work with the team to establish a low context approach, and the way to do it, it's first to share the issue or this aspect with the team. Be very open. Well, in the beginning of the project, call everyone and tell, well, guys, we are a multinational team. We have several interesting cultures working here. We have this Pakistanese cell, we have this Iran cell, we have this US commercial team, and we also have the Canadians working with us, and we each communicate in a different way. It is the way it is. It's not anybody's fault, but there is this issue. So we need to develop together how we will make sure that everyone for the team will grab a grasp on what is being said, will understand the task that needs to be done, and will understand the full context of the communication, get the full message. So the only way to do it is to establish a low context communication, making sure that you say everything that needs to be said. Because if we from Brazil try to communicate with a Chinese partner that you will be working with for several months within a project, trying to guess what are their high context clues, will be missing a lot of things. Even with experience, we'll be missing a lot of things, you know. So the best way to do it, get the team together, share the issue, let's establish a plan together, and during meetings and the daily work, start asking open-ended questions. So instead of yes or no questions, start open-ended questions. For instance, usually when we work with our Indian partners, not only India, but I'll get the Indian ones as an example. If you ask them for yes or no question, usually the answer will be yes, but, or yes, however, and there is a thing. So the first yes is not actually a yes, because we need to pay attention to the however, to the but. So if we ask them, well, could you work on this and deliver it to me by Friday? We'll usually or may receive an answer like this. Well, okay, no problem. So, okay, no problem. Great. But if we receive something like this, okay, I'll work on it. However, the deadline is too tight, or there was this other delivery that I was working on, so on and so forth. And people coming from low context, those yes are very great, and we're starting adding up issues to our project. We will much probably lead to delays in the project schedule. So start asking open-ended questions, let the team speak, let them speak to each other, ask for clarification. So what I usually do by the end of meetings in multicultural situations, and even I start adding this in the routine, even for only Brazilian projects, is asking for clarification. So ask the team to say what they understood, what was said, or to tell them in their words, so they could tell you in their words what they understood was said, what needs to be done, and usually establish our okay teams. By the end of the meeting, we will share meeting minutes just with the action items, so that everybody is okay with it. Because mostly for low context communication, this is okay. There is no issue with this approach. But if you don't agree upfront with high context communication teams, they may see this as mistrust on their performance. So it's very important that you set the rules explicitly, and you make ground rules and agreements. So define with the team working time, meet summaries, how they work, how the team will share progress reporting, so on and so forth, so that everybody is comfortable with the agreed rules by the team, not just with a set of imposed rules, and let them very aware of the multicultural aspect that is in play. You know, when you usually working with multicultural teams, and we'll see right here other aspects of multicultural. What usually happens is that if we have a team that has on evaluation a more indirect negative feedback dealing with a more direct negative feedback, we usually see some complaints about, well, you know, this or that guy or girl just told me that everything that I've been working the past week is trash and it's not worth it, and I need to work it and feel this is very frustrating, so on and so forth. You know, there are a lot of things going on when we have one culture relating to another, and we have to make the team comfortable with this environment, and the best way to do it is let them know that they are facing those kind of issues. So I brought to you two examples here, or actually 4 examples, how one culture relates to another. Remember that I said it's important to know where a culture is in that scale, but even more importantly, how does it compare to another one when dealing on daily activities. So on the left-hand side, we have US and Japan, a comparison between the lowest low communication context and the highest high context communication. And we can clearly see that they do not speak the same language at all, no pun intended. But they also have some similar way, they also have some similar traits. For instance, in scheduling, both of them tend to be very straight to the schedule, no more flexibility on it. Quite a little bit the other way around of Brazilian and other cultures which had distinct ways of dealing with scheduling. So in the same way, we can see here that France and Brazil have a lot of things in common. However, when coming to negative feedback, we see that French tend to be much more direct, which in the first stance may surprise Brazilian team or may surprise some teams that are not well used to direct negative feedback, but we have to call their attention that those are due to the culture. Is nothing particular between one individual and the other. And the more the team is comfortable with this approach, the more we'll have better communication. With better communication, better results within our project. I see here that there are some comments and some questions. I will be very back to it in a couple of minutes. Just to summarize, okay, some final remarks, and we will go to the Q&A sessions. I thank you all for joining today. So some final remarks. The culture, it's not let's say it's not a frozen aspect. You know, the culture will set a range of acceptable ways, and the way the research was done by Herick Morais was fantastic. It's actually the ones that are familiar with bell curves, they said they saw a normal way of acceptable ways, and which is plotted here is the normal. We, of course, will have some Germans that has even less context, that use less context in their communication, but we will also have some Germans that use more context. There are more high context in their communication. So the culture will set a range of acceptable ways of communication, and the individual will choose, usually, the individual that was raised in those in that culture will choose a specific approach, usually within that range. Of course, there are outliers. For instance, one can have Brazilian that are much more low context in their communication, that needs to say each and everything that he wants to communicate. However, this person in Brazil will be seen as too much repetitive, that he didn't need to say what he's saying, and we do not understand why he is repeating himself so often. The same way we can have an US guy or a Germany guy that use a lot of context when communicating, that leaves subtle messages, and could be seen under his or her culture as a non-straight to the point guy, and could also be seeing some negative feedbacks in their performance evaluation. So it's not a matter of culture or personality, it's a matter of culture and personality. We'll have both play an important role here, and remember that I said that it's important for you to know the skills of your team and to know the background. It's important to understand this combination of culture and personality. Okay, just a moment. Coming back again, when examining how different cultures relate, is not from a fixed position on a scale, but it's a comparison to one another. So, what do I mean? We already talked a little bit comparing Brazil and US. I will call another example in a project that I was in Europe. There were some Brazilian guys, there were some North American and other Latin culture as well, Central European cultures as well as UK. So, but in that context, there was me, let's say, a German guy and a UK guy, and the German was joking with the UK guy that he was joking with us, telling that, well, Brazilian tend to say that you are very precise, and we actually do have a saying in Brazil. We say that someone is as punctual, as precise as a British. And this is for us our standard of punctuality. However, for the German guys, they tend to complain about the UK or the British guys the same way we tend to complain from our partners to the left here or to the left on the scale of time. They told me, and that German guy told me that they do the same complaint from the UK. They tend to not respect deadlines, to be late for meetings. So for us, it's a surprise because that's our relative comparison. And so it's important for you when comparing the communication to understand where the culture that will be receiving or coming this communication from, to see it in relative to another in the scale. However, as I mentioned, it's not just communication. I will go back one slide a little bit more. That book that I mentioned to you, the culture map, brought us 8 aspects that need to be taken into account when dealing with different cultures. We just focus today on communication, but we also have how the culture evaluates, how they decide if it is a consensus, like we have a similar pattern between France and Brazil here, or a top-down, which we can see in the US here. China tends to be also top-down, even being an Asian. And you can see Japan here is much more consensus on trusting, if the trusting is established on a test base or relationship base, on how the cultures disagree. So if it is confrontation, like you have the French guys, we have direct negative feedback with a confrontation whenever disagreeing arise, and we have the Brazilian guys avoiding confrontation, much like the Japanese ones, which is quite, the French is much more confrontational than the Americans ones, for instance. And we also have the scheduling, how do they deal with linear timing, if they are more flexible or not, and how do they work with persuading. In terms of flexibility, it's like if one Canadian guy work with, I will grab a Spanish guy here, there could be any complaints that they are not meeting some target. I already saw that in previous projects. However, that tends to be the same complaints that the Spanish guys will do about any Iranian or Kenyan guys, So it's always in comparison, not only communication, but all other aspects. Oh, I'd like to. One final message is that the more the project and goals and benefits are understood and incorporated by the team, the more and the easier the decision will be taken on a daily basis. So communication, it's a key aspect in project management, it's a key aspect in leading teams, and must be taken seriously, especially on a multicultural and multinational Persian environment or environment. Okay, I will just see if there is some questions here in the chat. If you haven't shared your question yet, please feel free. I see here Marcel, Jenny, hello. So, which group do I include Germany? I'll just recap here. Yeah, you see on the first edition from Edward Hall, Germany was one of the lowest low culture in terms of communication, low context, not low culture, sorry, low context in terms of communication, very straightforward. However, as I mentioned, cultures evolve. So between 70s and nowadays, US is the lowest one. But we can see here that the Anglo-Saxon tends to make a cluster alongside the low context. Okay, so in terms of communication, German tends to be very straightforward to the point. In comparison, of course, with more high context communication teams or communication cultures. However, if you compare Germany and US, you'll see that sometimes there may be a complaint that the Americans are too much straightforward to the point. There is no sugar coating any message in the US. Whereas there could be any German. So, for instance, the UK has the British has a very distinct sense of humor, which can only be grasped if you have a little bit of shared context, which is not the case in the US. The puns in the US tend to be also very straightforward to the point. Manuel is just mentioning that don't say any bad things about the Portuguese. I'm here, so I'm glad to share with you the Portuguese, let's say, inheritance. So Portuguese are much more likely the Latin. It's Latin. So it's somewhere here in the middle, the full study in the books that are over 50 examples, 50 nationalities that are spread in the book. I encourage you to read it, Manuel. Roran Patel mentioned that I believe most communication service delivery teams typically delivering SAP processes low context. It comes down to specific team members as to their level of clarity in their communication. That's exactly the point, Roran. You have to make it clear. You have to have it very low context, but please pay attention not only to the functional specifications, but the daily planning and daily conduct of projects. It's very important to be low context. So you are right. In a high context, if someone from Argentina tries to grasp what is the high context in Indonesia, it will most certainly fail at least a couple of times before being more aware of those cultural subtleties. Jani Esco said that multicultural team need low context communication approach. Could you explain a little bit more? Thanks, Jani, for the question. One could almost say that this was played beforehand, but just coming back, there are those approach to communication, and I just gave this example of the Argentinian and the Indonesian guy. So when establishing the rules together with the team, the leader, the project manager, must be very clear of the issues that could arise with high context communication, which means less explicit in their message. So it's very important to use explicit message. The rules must be explicitly set. The message must be very clear. You need to say, there is another training in the US, which is fantastic, is that first you say what you're going to say. Second, you tell them the message. You tell the message that you came here to give them. Later, you review what you just said to make sure that everybody understood what you said. And third, finally, you go on and make sure that you recap, making sure that the message was clearly understood by everyone else. So that's the best approach, because with this you will tend to eliminate or at least reduce the amount of noise generated by multicultural aspects when dealing in this kind of environment. Okay, I guess this is all. We don't have any additional questions here. We are almost at the end of our session now. I just add some additional reading materials for you today. I will add this presentation, share the link to this presentation with you on YouTube description, okay? But additional to those articles and research, I led you with 4 books. One of them, it's hard to find to buy it. It's Beyond Culture by Edward Halls, the first one. We have the culture map by Herick Morais. I hugely encourage you, especially if you are passionate about cultures like myself. She adds a lot of examples. She is professor in INSEAD in France. She is an American, which worked in a consulting company for which helped the company deals with culture, and now is a professor in INSEAD. It's a fantastic book that she wrote, with a lot of examples, lively examples that we will recap that we lived in our past projects. And as a bonus, to understand even more about how people work overall, not only based on their culture, I encourage you to read 2 additional books. One is Mindset by Carol Dweck and Emotional Agility by Susan David. Both are great books and will for sure add up to what we've discussed here today. Thanks everyone for your time and really appreciate your feedback. It was a pleasure being here with you today. I guess there is no additional questions and we are done. Okay. Thanks very much. Have a nice week, and I expect that by 2020, by the end of 2020, we have moved forward from COVID-19. Thanks. It was a pleasure.